wasn't directional enough. Like, it was good, but it wasn't that great. It wasn't. There was no raging wage inflation, which would probably force yields way up. So just kind of like no story, no reason to trade today.
Yeah, it was kind of like, okay, this is confirmation of what we already knew. Yeah. So if you look at the sector breakdown.
Weekend.
Exactly, early weekend. If you look at the sector breakdown here, it's a little bit of a reversal of what we've seen the last couple of days and weeks. You've got interest rate sensitive companies doing better. So real estate investment trusts, utilities, staples with their dividends, they all gained quite nicely, while the financials, which had been the big winners post-election, were down 1%. Financials, in fact, even with today's drop, still up 13% after Election Day. Now, as stocks kind of falter or the rally stalls, however you want to put it, we see the VIX edging somewhat higher. If you look at a 5-day chart of the VIX, you could see that it's certainly come up a little bit there, but really far from the levels that we saw before the election.
Let's take a look at government bonds, starting with the U.S. 2-year and 10-year. We see yields lower across the board today. I think that weak average hourly earnings number relieved some pressure that the Fed might have to hike faster than expected. So kind of a meaningful drop there on 2-year and 10-year yields. Of course, those yields have been raging higher. Let's look at an intraday chart of the 10-year yield. Kind of gives the picture. 8:30, you saw a very quick sharp down, then up as everyone was trying to digest that jobs report that came out, and then just sort of mostly lower throughout the day. And quick look at Italian. Actually, we don't have the Italian 10-year yield, but they have their referendum this Sunday, and it was down a little bit.
That's all everyone's paying attention to. With treasuries recovering a bit, as Joe mentioned, pushing yields lower, the dollar is consolidating some of its gains. So if you look at the Bloomberg dollar index over the past week, the Trump dollar rally seeming to stall out at the end of this week. The dollar falling for the fourth time this week. It did gain once during this week, but overall, if you look at a bigger, longer-term picture, the dollar index still holding near its highest level ever. One currency I want to highlight here was the rand. It got a huge boost. It rose the most among all the emerging market currencies versus the dollar. And, of course, that line shows the dollar declining in value versus the rand. This is after S&P affirmed South Africa's foreign currency credit rating rather than downgrading it to junk status. So Moody's, Fitch, and S&P all keeping it above junk status. However, S&P did lower its local currency rating and warned that political interference in fiscal policy could maybe down the road lead to a downgrade.
And a quick look at commodities. Up across the board, across oil gaining another percent. Of course, oil had a huge week thanks to that OPEC meeting. Nickel and industrial metal doing well. We've seen the industrial metals do really well. And gold ticking up a little bit less than 1% today. And you got to look at a one-week chart of oil.
Oh, yeah.
That's just a monster chart. 12% gain on NYMEX crude oil for the week. That's really the huge story in commodities. That OPEC meeting, the decision to cut was not expected by traders, and you could see how significant that repricing ultimately was.
A lot of people saying that decision was more political than economic ultimately in the end, that get everyone together.
Apparently, there's a 2 a.m. phone call that sealed the deal.
Yeah, it's a great story available on the Bloomberg. All right, those are today's market minutes. We want to take a deep dive now into the Bloomberg. You can find all the charts using the function at the bottom of the screen. I wanted to show you Italy's report card, economic report card, before the referendum on Sunday. And this chart begins in February of 2014 when Matteo Renzi, now the prime minister, took power. The white line shows the number of households who say that their income does not meet expenses. It's come down by almost half. So when the line goes down, as it has here, it means people are meeting their expenses better. It's a measure of consumer confidence. But this improvement has come at a heavy price because you see public debt. This is the red line, has been soaring. It's now at 2.21 trillion euros. That is the highest among the euro area countries.
All right. Joining us now to talk more about all this, Bloomberg gadfly columnist Lionel Laurent, who writes about European banks. Thank you very much for joining us. So Italy really in the spotlight. There's multiple stories going on. There's the economic one. There's obviously the political one with the referendum. And then also the banking one, all sort of tied in. What's happening right now with the banks? Are they making more progress on figuring out some sort of resolution to this issue?
Yeah, so there's many different types of bank problem in Italy. Yeah. We all talk about Monte Paschi, right, which is a very small bank, but with a huge bad loan problem. Monte Paschi has a radical plan that it's trying to pull off, but it's doing so in the middle of this complex referendum, and that's one of the feedback loop issues. It's not so much that the referendum really directly affects the bank, but that if Renzi resigns, if there's political instability, does that make it harder for the bank to raise capital on the market? And does that make it harder to negotiate with Europe if there is the need for a systemic bailout?
All right, Monte Paschi, as you mentioned, kind of a small bank. How emblematic is it of the Italian banking sector's problems? Are more banks like it than not like it?
It's hard to say. There's a real divergence, right? Because there are big, solid, systemic banks like UniCredit that don't really look like Monte Paschi on the surface, but there is an infection, a contagion problem, where market perception and sentiment. If it's a drag on Monte Paschi, if non-performing loans don't get cleared up, if the market for non-performing loans doesn't really accelerate, that hurts big banks too. That hurts the share price and the sentiment around it. So the whole thing is linked.
And just to underscore how it's hurt the share price, if you come inside the Bloomberg here, this is the member-ranked returns this year of the Stock 600 Bank Index. And you could see that these are the worst performers. 5 out of the 6 names here, the worst performers are Italian banks. You have names like Banco Popolare, UBI Banca, Popolare di Milano, UniCredit, as Lionel was just referring to.
You mentioned that they sort of have this bold plan to restructure themselves. They need to go out into the market for credit. What are the mechanisms of the plan? How hard is it to execute?
It's really complicated. First of all, the sheer amount. They want to raise 5 billion euros of equity. The bank's market cap is barely 1 billion, right?
That's tricky.
So that's a very big number already. And there's all these different legs to the plan. There's a debt for equity swap, which we think is going to raise about 1 billion. There's also the need to get cornerstone investors, right, to get fresh equity in.
Right.
And there's a need to sell, to offload and spin off a huge pile of 27 billion euros of non-performing loans. That's a three-pronged solution. It's risky. It's complicated. The hope is that whatever political instability from the referendum comes, that we'll be able to somehow smooth it over. Maybe the ECB could help. But, it just makes things just that much more complicated.
I think we talked about it several months ago on this show. Part of the issue with non-performing loans is just they take a very long time to work through the system, right? So people have a really hard time valuing them in Italy because there may be value with these loans. It just takes a long time to realize them legalistically.
And it's really hard in Italy because the legislation there is different. The bankruptcy law is different. Some of these loans that are kicking around, they've been kicking around for like 10 years. Even if you if you were greedy enough to buy it, you are not sure to recover that cash flow on that loan, even at that deep discount. That's one of the issues.
Hence the need for reform, arguably.
Yes, so it comes full circle here. Although you could make the argument that Italian banks are actually pretty resilient, because I feel like we've been talking about the death of Italian banks for years now. And aside from Monte Paschi, what's really fallen apart? They're all still there. They're all still kicking around. These all seem to be doing... I mean, the share price has fallen quite a bit. The non-performing loans is up, but they haven't died off.
No, but it's very political. I mean, if you think about how many bailouts, how many recapitalizations Monte Paschi alone has had, that's a lot of destroyed capital. That's burnt fingers. And it's so political now because no government wants to soak or bail in, i.e. inflict losses on Italian households that are bondholders in a bank like Monte Paschi. It's pure politics. And the issue is that it gets so systemic now that it potentially pits Brussels against Rome.
And that's what makes the Italian banks and the whole problem surrounding them different than anywhere else in the world, that Italian households own bonds in these Italian banks.
Right, and also that Italy has had weak economic growth and that, again, in terms of the really tough reforms, it hasn't had quite the pain, quite the tough medicine that a country like Spain has had. So it does look a bit different.
Is there a role for the ECB to play in this, or is it really sort of an Italian political solution that needs to happen?
So the ECB is in a tough position because it is a central bank but also a regulator. The regulator of the ECB wants to be tough, especially tough on Italian banks. It's been the cause of a lot of worry over capital levels at Italian banks. So if it needs to soften on the central bank side, it may also have to soften on the regulator side too.
All right, Lionel Laurent, Bloomberg Gadfly columnist who covers European banks. Thank you very much.
Coming up, political risk is building across Europe as the populist wave gains ground. We're going to discuss Austria's elections this Sunday and what it means for the rest of the continent. This is Bloomberg.
Melendez. Let's get to Bloomberg's First Word News. More meetings today at Trump Tower as President-elect Donald Trump fills out his cabinet and senior staff. Among those on Trump's agenda, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, the founder of Encima Global David Malpass, former UN Ambassador John Bolton, and Democratic Senator of North Dakota Heidi Heitkamp. This weekend, Goldman Sachs President Gary Cohn will return for a second meeting with Trump. Cohn's been mentioned as a possibility for several jobs, including budget chief. Michigan's elections board is deadlocked on Trump's request to prevent a recount. That means unless the courts intervene, it will start next week. Meanwhile, Michigan's attorney general wants the state Supreme Court to intervene and stop the recount. In Wisconsin, one is already underway, though Trump supporters have filed a federal lawsuit trying to stop it. And in Pennsylvania, Trump is asking a court to dismiss Green Party candidate Jill Stein's request for a recount. Ireland's Prime Minister says the UK's decision to leave the European Union stands in stark contrast to its history as a forward-looking player on the international stage. Edna Kenny sat down today with Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite and recalled the reaction to the Brexit news.
Britain was always a really important member of the European Union and was a voice for change and was a voice for a vision for the future. Obviously, the decision then in Brexit came as a shock. It's something I didn't want to see, something that I didn't want, but I have to respect because it's a democratic decision, so we get on with it.
Kenny also said the UK won't be allowed to pick and choose which aspects of the EU it wants to keep as it prepares to leave the world's biggest trading bloc. And in South Carolina, jurors say they have failed to reach a verdict in the trial of a white former police officer charged with killing a black motorist during a traffic stop. The judge has asked them to resume deliberations. Cell phone video shows Michael Slager shooting 50-year-old Walter Scott several times in the back as Scott left his car and tried to run. Slager testified he'd feared for his life after Scott got a hold of his taser. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nina Melendez. This is Bloomberg. Scarlett?
Thank you so much, Nina. What'd you miss? Italy's referendum may be hogging the headlines, but Austria's also got a big vote coming up on Sunday. Austrians head to the polls in a historic election that's seeing two establishment parties absent on the ballot. Mark Chandler of Brown Brothers Harriman says he's keeping his eye on Austria.
The real challenge, I think, for people going to be on Monday is not going to be the Italian election or the Italian referendum. The Austrian election, it's likely, and the polls suggest, that the far-right candidate, which would be the first time a far-right candidate heads a European country, is president of a European country since the end of World War II. This would be that third populist point.
I really like that answer because it's like always interesting to pay attention to international politics, but it's really cool to say like everyone's paying attention to the wrong one.
Wasn't that first election back in May and they thought they had it squared away? Hofer was defeated. Now you've got a post-Trump world where anything's possible.
Right. So they're running it again. And I talked about Chandler's answer with Bloomberg News executive editor John Fair on whether Austria really is the one to watch this Sunday. Let's play that conversation.
To be sort of polite about it, I think that's something that sounds good. But you know, if you look at sort of the potential fallout from the Italian referendum, it probably doesn't quite hold as much water as you might like. I mean, I would actually respond to that by saying we actually have already seen the populist insurgency in Austria. You know, if you think back until earlier this year, we had the first round of the election for the first time in 7 decades. Both of the two establishment parties failed to get a candidate into the final round. So I would actually argue that Austria is already fully in the throes of a populist uprising.
For those who haven't been paying attention to this story, which is most people, why is the presidential election being run a second time?
Well, what happened was that literally the second round of the election earlier this year, it was so close to call. I think it went into the Wednesday after the Sunday vote, and it was really narrow. And essentially went to the Constitutional Court, and they decided that there were so many irregularities in the whole process that they needed a rerun.
Now, this is the presidential election, not the prime minister. What is the role of the president in Austria? And remind us who the candidates are and what would be the significance of if the right-wing candidate were to win.
Well, it is very interesting. So historically speaking, the role of the presidency in Austria has been a ceremonial role.
Right.
That is how the incumbents of the position have used it. But it is interesting if you look at how the structure of Austrian politics. The Austrian president actually has more power than you might have thought. It has the ability to call snap elections. It can dismiss governments, and both candidates have said that they are willing to push the power of the presidency to the maximum. So we are going to see, whatever happens, we are going to see the practice of Austrian politics change. And just sort of tell you very briefly about the candidates. So we have, on the one hand, we have the Green Party candidate. He's actually standing as an independent, but he's supported by the Greens, Alexander van der Bellen, and he's sort of quite pro free trade. Obviously, is very keen on keeping Austria tightly bound in to the European Union. And on the other hand, we have the People's Party candidate Norbert Hofer. Now, the interesting thing about him is that, yes, he is, as you would imagine from a right-wing populist in Europe, he is very sceptical, resistant to more immigrants and refugees coming into the country. He does question Austria's role in the EU. But the distinguishing thing between him and, say, Marine Le Pen in France, or obviously the Brexiteers, is that he's not advocating, at least immediately, an Austrian withdrawal from the EU. So if you look at the constellation of European populists, he's probably one of the more sort of conservative ones.
That's very interesting. So what are the key issues here? Is it really about the sort of immigration and refugee issues?
Yeah, and ultimately it's about Austria's role in the modern world. On the one hand, and it's a lot of the same debates are playing out that we saw in the US presidential debate. There are a lot of people who feel dislocated and confused by free trade and by the dynamics of free trade. I guess the difference between Europe and the US is that on the fringes of Europe you've had this human catastrophe, this demographic catastrophe of this huge numbers of dislocated people are sort of swarming towards Europe. And again, it's one of the questions that is sort of dominating every democracy in the EU right now, is to how many of these people can we take in? How many of these people will our social fabric withstand? And that's the other sort of key issue, along with trade and the EU. Immigration, refugees is also one of the other key issues. But it does boil down to the question of what is our role in the modern world, and how do we fit into it.
So after this election, what's next in Austrian politics? What's the next sort of step here in terms of the direction the country's going to go?
Well, I think this is such a traumatic event, and it's been traumatic is probably overstating it, but it has gripped the population so much that I think what the country will need is a certain period of stability. Of course, Brexit is going to dominate the agenda of every government over the next few months, and I think whoever wins, these questions that have dominated the campaign, immigration especially, are just not going to go away.
That was Bloomberg News executive editor John Ferrer.
President-elect Donald Trump today turned to some of Wall Street's biggest names to form a panel of business leaders that will give strategic advice on the economy after he takes office. Blackstone Group CEO Stephen Schwarzman will chair this panel that includes JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, as well as BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. Schwarzman is standing by right now with our New York bureau chief Jason Kelly. Jason?
Thanks, Scarlett. And Steve, great to be with you. So this seems like a big job that the president-elect has asked you to do. How did this come about?
Came about because he called me. And I've known Donald for a long time, and he was looking for advice on different appointments and different approaches, and he asked me if I would like to help him form a group to give him advice, because they were about to do a lot of different things, and it's important to get a sense for them of whether they're going the right direction or the wrong direction. And he said, if we can meet, pretty frequently, and get enough people so we can sit around a table, not an auditorium. I want the best and the brightest in the country. I don't care whether they're Republicans or Democrats. I don't care about anything other than how wise, smart, engaged, and successful they are at running their businesses, whatever they are, and people who have the range of things that go on all over the world. And you pick them and tell me who you think we should engage, and I'll tell you if I like them. And if I do, then go out and ask them, and let's get in business. So I came up with a list of a lot of terrific people who could meet those criteria in the United States. We're a pretty remarkable country. And he liked them all. He said, what terrific people. He said, let's go.
Yeah.
And he said the objective of the exercise isn't to have an announcement. It's not to have a photo op. He said, actually, I get a lot of photo ops. He said, it's really for me to learn what people have to say in an unconstrained way. They don't report to me. They're independent, and I want to know what they know. So that's how we did it.
So you hang up the phone with the president-elect. How do you then pivot to the task of picking these people?
Yeah, well, you know, I have a pretty wide range of people I know. So I thought about who would be interesting because of their knowledge either in one industry or an area, or who touches a lot of different parts of the economy, so you can get an overall view, both domestic and international. And so people were selected not for their narrow focus, but for what they could add overall.
Well, and it does seem like when you go down the list and you have a Jamie Dimon or Larry Fink or a Bayo Ogunlesi, Mary Barra, I mean, these are people who obviously have expertise, but to your point, they also have networks of people that presumably they're talking to all the time for business reasons in the same way that you are.
Right. So you look at somebody like Mary, and you know, she's got this huge number of suppliers, and they know what's going on there. She operates and sells vehicles all over the world. She's involved with technology, you know, self-driving cars and other elements of technologies that are put into vehicles. So car companies almost by accident found themselves on the cutting edge of technology. And there's many other things that, for example, a GM would touch. She's on the board of Stanford. She's got a pretty wide range of networks and things that she sees. And everybody involved is similarly situated in different industries as a prime. But you know, if you look at, you know, one of the great banks in the world, this one happens to be J.P. Morgan, the largest corporate lender in the world, so they know what's going on with that. Huge consumer business that spans a country, so they know what's going on. They're global, one of the most global banks, so they have input on every part of the world. And so if you assemble a group of roughly 15 people with that kind of knowledge base, you'll be able to have some really fascinating discussions.
Many people stood on the sidelines during this election, not choosing sides, you among them, at least publicly. What was the response that people gave you when you called and asked them to do this for the president-elect?
Yeah, it was interesting. They wanted to know what he was like. And, you know, I've been to a lot of different things with him, whether it's his wedding or, you know, him going to events with me or being at my house for dinner or something like that. And I've had a good number of conversations with him since he was elected and before he was elected. And so I have a feel that he's really likes to learn things. And he had a reasonably narrow period before this launch into politics where he's basically doing buildings. He's doing them mostly in the United States, some outside, but he's like a sole proprietor of a business that built some office towers and residential. And so he's aware, of course, that he doesn't know a lot of other things, because how could you if that's what you did? So what I found from talking to him is that he's really curious, and he wants to learn, and he wants to be successful. Now, he has his own unique style, but outside of the style, in private settings, he's really curious, and he wants to make sure he's not making mistakes. And what you would logically do in situations like that is you would reach out to learn. And so that's part of, I think, why he asked me to do this. And the people who wanted to know whether they should do it wanted to know if it's worthwhile, because nobody wants to waste their time. Everybody on this group is like super busy, super engaged, and has a lot of important responsibilities. So basically, once I explained what it's like having conversations, and positions can change. If somebody says, this is like really a bad idea, we can get a lot of trouble here, we'd say, well, who wants to be in trouble? And so every discussion required, pretty much an hour or something. And once they were satisfied that this was an important thing for the country, so it made it a good use of their time. And it's really to keep the country on a good path. And this ends up being a group that's clearly, nonpartisan group. You can be a Republican, you can be a Democrat, you can be nothing. Politically, Donald didn't care. It's just about talent, judgment, experience, insight. And so just about everybody said, geez, this is a really important thing to do. I don't want to be on the sidelines. The country's going to go through a lot of change, much of it positive, some of it like in the who knows pile, at least initially. And I should be at the table. I should be helpful for the good of the country.
Right.
And it was nice to see people put aside, narrow interests and things of that type.
Right. You mentioned positions changing. There is a sense early on in this president-elect's transition that he's willing to reconsider a lot of things that maybe he said in the heat of a campaign. Is everything on the table at this point, especially when it comes to the things you care about as an investor and a Wall Street executive?
I have a lot of things I care about, but what I care about principally is that the country does well. There's almost no one in the business community who does poorly when the country does well. I mean, you have to really work at failing in that kind of environment. And so that's good for middle-income people, for sure. It's good for lower middle-income people. It's good for business. So things that can be made into a positive sums game are things that I like to be involved with. I think that's where he's going. The route to getting there will not be straight.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that are quite straightforward, that are great for the country, whether it's, tax reform, a change in the regulatory posture, where we have GDP that's been constrained by 1 foot on the gas with low interest rates and 1 foot on the brake. As we have very substantial amounts of regulation.
And do you think that regulatory policy will change meaningfully and fast in this administration?
Absolutely, and it's got limits on the fast. There are certain presidential actions that you can take, and those will be done very quickly. There are other actions that they would like to take which need hearings. And so that just can't be done with the stroke of the pen. There are others that require people in certain regulatory agencies to finish their term. So there'll be very little that happen there instantaneously. And there are certain regulations that shouldn't be changed, right? Because nobody's looking at an unconstrained environment. So whatever can be done really fast will be done. The hearings will happen as soon as they can happen, and most of those will get done. And then you'll get to the part where you change personnel. And then there's the parts that require legislation. The parts that require legislation will be tough to get done. And the reason is that, on a philosophic basis, it appears that Democrats like more regulation. At least that's what they said in the last election, and that's probably true. The Republicans like less. And so those will be difficult things to change.
And if you had to press for one specific change in regulation with the president-elect, you have his ear, what would it be?
I don't think like that. You know, I like to see a laundry list of things. What should we be doing? I think that bank lending has been really constrained, and banks, for the most part, have shrunk as a result of the safety and soundness issues, some of which are really important. On the other hand, it's very difficult to have a country grow quickly while its banking system is shrinking. This is one of the problems that Europe is experiencing. And if you can't get enough consumer credit, if you can't get enough loans, if you can't have enough risk taken to move forward, then smaller companies don't get credit. They can't hire people. It's a cycle. And you have to break that and do it with safety, but don't do it under astonishing constraint. So if you look at just some things that have happened, Citibank, for example, has shrunk roughly $1.5 trillion. When you talk about, you know, sort of a $500 billion infrastructure program over 5 or 10 years, that's $100 billion compared to the shrink of just one bank. It's not really that impactful. It's a good idea, but it's not as impactful, and that's just one bank. Around the world, there's been massive shrinks. So one reason why we have frustrated people is we've basically shrunk, and it's time for that to be over. Just fiscal stimulus isn't big enough to make that happen, and it would involve taking on debt as well to basically reform the financial system without introducing much in the way of risk. Is a lot more efficacious than just doing fiscal policy.
You've been one of the biggest proponents and supporters of China in the sense of your Schwarzman Scholars Program, just announced, I believe, its second class. China obviously was very much a part of this campaign. What's your advice to President Trump on how to think about China, given your experience there?
Well, I think he's thinking about China. And I think the Chinese are thinking about him the way many people in the world are. And I think, you know, he's basically in favor of more open markets. I think there's an evolution that happens in developing worlds. We sort of forget that China is a developing world economy. They're now up to somewhere around $8,000 per capita, but distributed in a very odd way. The interior of the country has very little in the way of $2,000, something like that a year, and the coasts have more. So there were a variety of things in place that were very helpful to the Chinese in terms of developing their economy, and the U.S. economy hasn't worked out so well, right? So you now have 60% of Americans whose disposable income in real terms is less than it was in 2000. So it's 16 years with 60% of our people being losers. And I think the Chinese understand that is the current state of play, and that's not sustainable. And so, you know, I think there's a win-win game here where, you know, markets can be opened, and that's helpful, you know, for Americans. Now, how you get there is at least as important as where you get. And so it's a question of not losing face, not embarrassing people, not putting them in a corner. I do believe that the understanding of the American position, which is not optimal now, is going to have to be addressed in a consensual way. And I'm hopeful that, you know, despite bumps in the road, which inevitably there will be, that there will be a win-win solution for both countries.
Steve Schwarzman, great to see you. Good luck with this new assignment with the president-elect. and we'll hope to hear more about it as it goes along. Scarlett, back to you.
All right, thank you so much. Jason Kelly, our Bloomberg News New York Bureau Chief, and, of course, Blackstone's Group CEO, Stephen Schwartzman. Let's get a recap of today's market action. We had a jobs report today, everybody, but it didn't really seem to inspire a lot of conviction in equities. You have the Dow down by 21 points. The S&P 500 little changed for the week. The Dow was the only major index that closed higher, while the S&P and the Nasdaq was down. The jobs report, Joe, didn't seem to really change anyone's mind on what's going to happen with the Fed.
No, because the headline was strong, but some of the internals were just so-so, so it didn't really change much. All right, what'd you miss? It's crunch time for Italian voters and Prime Minister Matteo Renzi with the constitutional referendum vote on Sunday. Renzi is trying to change the Constitution to streamline government. Joining us now for more on Sunday's vote is former chief economist and director general at the Italian Treasury and London School of Economics visiting professor Lorenzo Codogno. Lorenzo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I think there's kind of a view that the referendum is not going to pass. I think that is close to the conventional wisdom. Is it still an open question, though? Could yes win, in your view?
In my view, yes, it could still win. I mean, I think it's a 50-50 probability, to be quite honest. It is true that opinion polls are actually suggesting that the no camp is going to win. But my guess is not only because they failed to predict Brexit and Trump, but also because I think it will be important, the turnout. Because if the turnout is not big enough, it might actually be that the yes camp wins. And also, I think it will be key to see what are the votes on non-residents. For the first time, non-residents like myself can actually cast their vote by mail, which is a novelty. So I think there are a number of uncertainties. I think it's still 50-50, to be quite honest.
And we understand that you voted yes already as you cast your ballot. Talk to us a little bit about the opposition to Matteo Renzi. Who are they? Are they fractured groups that have little common ground with each other, aside from the fact that they oppose Matteo Renzi and they just want to work together to topple him?
Exactly. I mean, I think the opposition is very much fragmented. Some people want the reforms to go even beyond what is proposed right now. Some other people want to oppose completely the reform. So I think if this proposal fails to get a popular vote, it would be extremely difficult to come up with a different proposal. My guess is that we won't talk about constitutional reforms for the next 10 years.
The referendum is designed to allow a streamlining of the creation of laws, basically make government work better. Let's say it does pass. What then is on the actual reform agenda for this government? With this new ability to get things passed, what needs to, what are the tasks ahead?
Well, first of all, the next general elections are in the spring of 2018. Unless, there is something, very disruptive that, forces early elections, but I don't think will be the case. So that is the kind of time frame. I think if the current government, Matteo Renzi, and the rest of the PD goes to elections and they win the elections, so they have an outright majority with a majority of seats in the lower house, which will be the only lawmaking house according to the reform, then you might actually expect a more kind of reformist stance in the next political term. I think between now and the next elections it's kind of difficult to expect any significant fiscal consolidation or any structural reform, significant structural reform, simply because it's election time already.
And, of course, this vote on constitutional reform has turned into a make-or-break vote on Matteo Renzi's future and his vision for Italy and how the economy can move forward, be smaller, be more nimble. Why is it that Matteo Renzi's economic reforms have yet to bring about change? Is it flawed the way it's constructed, or has he not been given enough time to deliver on them, or is it a case of the legislature and the government, the way it's structured, won't allow for the kinds of changes he's proposing?
Well, he took office in February 2014. Initially, there was honeymoon. Indeed, later on, in May 2014, there was a European elections, and the PD got almost 41% of the votes. So basically, people were very, very happy and excited about the new prime minister and the new government. But clearly, after 2.5 years, and if you don't see the economy recovering with a pace that is strong enough to generate jobs and to provide some kind of good feeling, then you start thinking, well, it's not going particularly well. And this is what is happening now. So there are people that are disillusioned with the current government and the Prime Minister. I think it's kind of difficult to recover, to have a recovery in the economy when you have very heavy headwinds, such as problems in the banking sector, like we have seen in Italy. And so I think it's kind of difficult to see, a strong recovery right now. But again, expectations by voters are pretty high, and actually they have been a little bit disappointed.
Lorenzo, if Italy votes no on Sunday, nothing necessarily happens immediately. Renzi doesn't even need to step down. But looking down the road, do you think it's plausible that a sequence of events could happen that would see Italy leave the Eurozone, or is that still just a real long shot in your view?
No, this is, some commentators suggested that, there is this kind of risk. I don't see that, to be quite honest. I mean, this is about a constitutional change.
Right.
I think there is very little risk of early elections. There is very little risk of a prolonged instability, because if this government will not find the proper support in Parliament, probably there will be a large coalition. And I don't think there is any doubt that Italy will stay in the euro. However, having said that, I do believe that there are risks in terms of financial stability, because the situation of banks is a little bit fragile. There are a number of banks that need to increase capital over the next few weeks, and probably Monte Paschi will have to announce pretty soon whether they intend to increase capital. So I think it's a little delicate moment, and the combination of potential political instability, if only for a few weeks, combined with the fragility in the banking sector, I think it's a delicate mix. And so I think there are some risks here.
All right, Lorenzo Codogno, thank you very much. Lorenzo Codogno of the London School of Economics, visiting professor.
Coming up, the market's appetite for risk has been the exact opposite of most predictions made before the surprise election outcome. We will break down the Trump effect for you next. This is Bloomberg. Scarlet Fu. What you missed? Are we risk on or risk off? It depends on how you define it. Let's take a deep dive into the Bloomberg. You can find this chart using the function at the bottom of the screen. So what we have here is a proprietary index created by Robert Jen. He's one of our Hong Kong-based application specialists. And what he did was use 18 different indicators in equities, sovereign yields, FX, commodities, volatility, and liquidity to create this gauge, which measures global macro risk-on, risk-off sentiment. So anything that's green means risk on. Anything that's red is risk off. And before the election, Joe, as you know, all kinds of predictions that a Trump victory would spell recession, would be like the post-Brexit risk off scenario. Instead, what you saw was this zoom higher in risk on sentiment, a rise in risk appetite, and it is now at the highest in about a year, going all the way back to December of 2015.
It really just shows people just got it totally wrong. I mean, everyone like comes on here and says, well, we kind of had, everyone just got it totally wrong.
They got it totally wrong, and what we're seeing now in this risk on is different from what we've seen in the past, right? Because you usually have emerging market currencies and bonds do better in a risk on environment. That's not happening this time.
True, it is different. All right, I'm looking at a chart that was sent to us by our old friend George Perks of Bespoke Investment, who used to come on the show before he left New York. And it looks at the Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index broken down by the different party affiliations. And check out the blue line, which is how Democrats feel about the economy.
Sad.
Boom, major collapse. It was as high as 55, down to 47. Also, we see independents ticking up and Republicans ticking up. Still not a surge in Republican sentiment, so it'll be interesting to watch that. But it is really fascinating to see how one's own view of the economy is shaded by one's own ideological affiliation and how quickly it can turn around when your party is not in power. So kind of fascinating behavioral, ideological things going on.
This would suggest that the independents see Donald Trump as one of theirs more than the Republicans do.
Or maybe the independents are just happy it's over.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Either way.
They didn't like either candidate, right? All right, coming up next, an exclusive interview with International Monetary Fund Managing Director Christine Lagarde on Brexit, France's economy, and how to solve financial inequality. This is Bloomberg. What you missed, IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde spoke exclusively today with Bloomberg Editor-in-Chief John Micklethwaite as part of our Enterprising Women series. Now, as part of the discussion, she gave us her thoughts on France's economy.
We certainly view France as a country that needs to continue seriously in-depth reforms of its economy. And whoever is elected comes next May will have to tackle head-on the need for structural reforms. The labour market has begun a reform, but it needs to be faster and deeper. Product markets have begun to reform a little bit, in the bus sector. Okay, great, but we need a bit more than that. That economy needs more than that. And it has the benefit of this accommodating monetary policy by the ECB, which presumably is going to continue for a while. The price of oil is still low, even at around 50, which is maybe where it will hang for the next few months. The euro is, 105, 106 to the dollar. It's not bad when you're an exporting country, and you buy oil at a reasonably low price per barrel. So the whole scenery, the whole landscape should be really favorable to those structural reforms and a limited use of fiscal space, because fiscal space can only be used appropriately to support the structural reforms. It cannot be an invitation to just increase public spending. There's plenty of public spending in France at the moment, so it needs to be rejigged, reorganized, and reshaped.
You look at Britain, is that now, in your mind, is it moving a little bit away from hard Brexit to soft Brexit?
Comments, all the little posturing here and there seem to indicate that we are still looking at a hard Brexit. And it's, our hope at the IMF is that the uncertainty is cleared, because that's the first factor that is really, for the moment, questioning investment decisions. I know that there are numbers that seem to indicate that there is still investment, there is still movement, but when you talk to people, they are really concerned about what the outcome will be. I think in the financial sector, a lot of clarity would help, because the financial passports that banks located on the British territory, and I should say the English, should I say British or English? I never know.
British.
British. That exclude Ireland as part of the EU, which it is as an independent country. But those banks on British territory will want to know, and their shareholders will want to know, whether or not there is a passport to continue to act in the rest of Europe. Do you think
the kind of two-year deadline, Mrs May goes and invokes Article 50, and then it takes 2 years, that's really becoming... It's going to take longer than 2 years. We had Enda Kenny, the Irish Prime Minister, this morning. He was saying that.
Yeah, most people who are close to the preparation, and on both sides they are preparing and they are trying to move along the curve, they are all saying that it's going to take longer than 2 years. I mean, when you look, it's going to be something like 60 different bilateral trade treaties that will have to be negotiated, if only that to begin with. And then you have to disentangle the system.
Madame Lagarde also gave us her thoughts on how to help lessen inequality around the world. Take a listen.
We tend to say that we want less inequality because we are now really demonstrating that excessive inequality are a source of instability and are not conducive to sustainability of growth. So if you park just those three buckets, more growth, less inequality, more diversification, including women in the economy addresses those three issues. It increases growth significantly, and you know the numbers, you have them as well, and many in the room have them. You can increase US GDP by 5%, but you can increase Indian GDP by 27%. If you look at diversification, we have now documented evidence of the fact that when women participate in the economy and in the labour market as much as men do, you have a more diversified economy. And by bringing women to the labour market, giving them access to finance, you reduce the inequality.
And that was IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde in an exclusive interview earlier on Bloomberg.
Coming up, what you need to know to gear up for next week. This is Bloomberg.
A busy weekend coming up. Don't miss this. On Sunday, Italians head to the polls. They will vote on a referendum on constitutional reform. Prime Minister Matteo Renzi possibly staking his political future on this outcome.
And the same day, I'll be watching the Austrian presidential election on Sunday. It's a replay of a vote that they had earlier this year. It was so close. We'll see if the right-wing populist wins this time.
Norbert Hofer, maybe. And don't miss this. ISM non-manufacturing, that is, of course, services. That comes out at 10 a.m. on Monday. And, of course, investors will be watching that one. That's all for What You Missed. Thanks for watching.
Have a great weekend. This is Bloomberg.
John Heilman.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to... just run the tape. I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilman. I'm John Heilman.
And I'm Mark Halperin.
I'm John Heilman.
And I'm Mark Halperin.
And I'm Donald Trump. Wait, whose line is it?
And with all due... This is Mark Halperin.
And I'm John Heilman.
With all due respect...
With all due respect...
With all due respect...
With all respect due...
With all due respect. Tremendous show.
With all due respect to Chipotle...
To Snoop Dogg.
To Meghan Trainor...
To Jennifer Aniston and Lisa Kudrow.
To 7-Eleven...
To Kanye West. To Sharknado 3.
To the Gipper... Lenny and Squiggy... John Travolta... Chris Christie...
Oh, yes! Baby!
Whoa. With all due respect to Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton. To Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders.
To Donald Trump.
Trump.
Thanks, guys. We'll take it from here.
These are their stories.
So am I supposed to say something?
We'll take it from here, Lindsay. Tonight, a toast in our shared raised cocktail glasses, equal parts sappy and semi-sober, with a twist of Joel Benenson, hold the blue cheese olives. Most things, even the good ones in life, are ephemeral. And so this evening, we conclude what has been a very memorable, very sleep-deprived, and at times hastily assembled, roughly 2 years of this program, with all due respect. We've got a very special show planned for you tonight with some very special and some very familiar guests. In the words of the greatest American poet and philosopher, Taylor Swift, I'm dying to see how this one ends. But before we get to the emotional end, let's start with some news and our final check-in on Donald Trump's admin building efforts. Last night, during Trump's debut thank you rally in Cincinnati, the president-elect let slip that he will be tapping retired Marine General James Mad Dog Mattis as his defense secretary. Today, Trump's team also announced a February forum at the White House of business advisors that's going to include some of the titans of the American corporate world, including the Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman, J.P. Morgan Chase topper Jamie Dimon, General Motors CEO Mary Barra, and my former boss and the main man at the Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger. John, this list of business advisors is, to many, as surprising as it is impressive. What do you make of the corporate giants signing up to help the next president?
We have been having a discussion in our world of politics and media ever since Donald Trump got elected about the question of normalizing Donald Trump. He was an abnormal candidate in a lot of ways and violated a lot of democratic norms and a lot of traditions and a lot of established ways of doing things. This is, it was inevitable if he won that there would be capitulation on the part of a lot of establishmentarians who had fought him before. But this group, many Republicans, some Democrats, this is a sign that the normalization is not complete because Donald Trump is still abnormal in a lot of ways and should be treated as such. But a lot of people in the business world, a lot of people in the political world are like, this is it, man, he's the president-elect, and we can hold him accountable in various ways, but he's going to be treated like a president, a normal president.
You can say it's inevitable, but I have to say, it wasn't that long ago, 5-6 months ago, when he would talk about certain people who might serve in his cabinet, and they would tell people quietly, I'm not serving in that guy's cabinet.
Are you nuts, right?
I am surprised, not just at the recruitment of Mattis, who many people in the establishment are wildly enthusiastic about, but the recruitment of this group, even though it's just an advisory meeting, is to me, I won't say stunning, because it takes a lot to stun me, but this surprises me a great deal that some of these people are putting their names now to the kickoff of the administration. Well, they'll be in the midst of the legislative agenda, and presumably a lot of them will endorse the Trump agenda.
Here's why I'm not surprised, in the end, that ideals, and I say this with some regret and some ruefulness, but ideals, political positions, ideology, all that stuff, for corporate leaders, in the end, it's about the bottom line. For political leaders, in the end, it's about power. And this guy is going to be president, and a lot of them are like, I can sit at a cocktail party or at a dinner party and complain about him and say he's not fit for office, but in the end, his policy decisions are going to affect my company's bottom line. And his decisions in Washington are going to affect the power dynamics.
The president-elect has invited me, and I'm flattered, and I'll go. And
or if they're not, whether they're flattered or not, I'm not going to give the middle finger to a guy who's going to be setting tax policy in the country.
I have a big influence on my respect for a lot of people on this list is quite high, including Bob Iger, I'll say. And the fact that they're willing to put their brand next to the first month of the Trump administration is, I'll say again, it's pretty surprising to me. I get everything you're saying. I'll just say in some visceral way, this, as much as anything that's happened since he's been elected, says to me he's got a chance to balance the abnormal and the totally different with the conventional. This could not be a more conventional thing for a president-elect to do, to invite this group of people to the White House in the beginning.
There are going to be millions of Americans who continue to believe that Donald Trump is not really their president, and will proudly carry the banner, not my president, not legitimate, not going to accept him. But in the realm of corporate America and in the halls of Congress, those people, many of whom trashed Donald Trump 6 months ago, they're now acceding to the reality of it and trying to make peace with it to the best they can. All right, there is at least one group, like the one that I was just talking about, that's not quite ready to accept a Trump presidency, and that would be the members of Hillary Clinton's inner circle and her campaign who took part in a Harvard Institute of Politics forum earlier this week. It is a tradition every 4 years. Campaign strategists gather in Cambridge to hash out a first draft of election history. This year's event started with moderator Andrea Mitchell welcoming Trump and Clinton operatives in the, quote, spirit of reconciliation. By the end, both sides had completely lost their cool. Exhibit 1, this biting exchange between Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway and Clinton comms director Jennifer Palmieri.
If providing a platform for white supremacists makes me a brilliant tactician, I am glad to have lost. And one of Hillary, give me a minute, David. I am more proud of Hillary Clinton's all-right speech than any other moment on the campaign, because she had the courage to stand up. I would rather lose than win the way you guys did.
Do you think I ran a campaign where white supremacists had a platform? You going to look me in the face and tell me that?
It did. Kellyanne did.
Oh, and that's how you lost?
It did.
Do you think you could have just had a decent message for the white working class voters?
We are going to have our dollop of campaign reflections from Clinton senior strategist Joel Benenson, who was at that event up in Cambridge and will be with us in just a moment. But first, Clinton's team has been criticized for seeming not to fully grasp the reasons that their candidate came up short in the election. Mark, from what you heard at Harvard, on a scale from 1 to Godzilla, yeah, there he is. On a scale from 1 to Godzilla, how much is the Clinton campaign still in denial about Hillary Clinton's loss?
Well, if you take their public statements, you'd say it'd begin close to Godzilla. But the fact is it's a 3. They can't blame their candidate. They don't want to blame each other publicly. Behind the scenes, though, there's a much greater recognition of the things that went wrong. But I will say, I thought that the tone of that thing was horrible. A lot of people that I've known for a long time on both sides in respect, I did not like to see what it escalated to. But the reality is, if you lose a race by that few votes, you can point to 1,000 things. They're pointing to the ones that are the politically and personally safest places to be. I don't think they're saying things that are wrong. But I do think publicly they're not giving anything like a complete explanation, starting with the performance, as Kellyanne Conway said, of the Democratic candidate.
I've been to a lot of those Harvard events, and the first one I ever went to in my life was in 1988 when I was a graduate student at the Kennedy School of Government, and I was able to come and watch. And it was after that campaign where the Bush campaign, George Herbert Walker Bush's campaign, had run a terrible negative campaign to destroy Mike Dukakis. And the passions were like this. It was the only time I've ever seen it before. Susan Estrich on one side, Roger Ailes on the other side, Lee Atwater, who are screaming at each other with this kind of emotion. There's occasionally you get a campaign like that, where one side feels not only like they lost surprisingly, as was the case with Dukakis, who thought he had their campaign, thought they had the election in the bag for many months, but lost in a way where they felt like the other side colored way outside the lines and ran a nasty, dirty, unprecedentedly horrible campaign. So the emotions are just very close to the surface here. I think that give everybody, both sides, the Trump people who are spiking the football in an unpleasant way, the Clinton people who are still obviously emotional and overwrought about it, give them all a little time. I don't think it's about denial. It's just about the fact that the emotions are still so close to the surface. People need a little more time to get to a proper understanding of what took place.
And the comparison's apt because the Dukakis people felt the Bush people won in an illegitimate way, as you said, outside the lines.
All that stuff, yeah.
And in this case, the passion within the Clinton campaign of saying there were dog whistles, there were inappropriate appeals, there were things well over the line is pretty heartfelt. But as I said, over time, I think we'll learn that they see in a more 360-degree way the other factors that played a role here, including some divisions within the campaign about how they should have campaigned.
But here's the thing I don't think will go away. I think that Jennifer Palmieri, Robbie Mook, Joel Benenson, John Podesta, I think they will still think that Donald Trump ran a racist campaign. They'll still think that they provided a platform for anti-Semitism, for a white nationalism. And I think they'll be right about all those things. But they will better understand their failures. In addition to, I think they'll maintain that consistency. But I think they will better understand the things they did wrong than they do today.
Can you imagine what it would have been like if Steve Bannon had showed up?
Oh.
Okay, up next,
fistfights.
Clinton strategist Joel Benenson is here on this set for a final farewell exit interview after these words from our fabled sponsors.
listen, you guys won. That's clear. You won the Electoral College. That's the currency.
That was the fight,
right? Let's also be honest. Don't act as if you have some popular mandate for your message. 2.5 million more Americans thought she was a better candidate.
I just want to go back to the 270 or the 306 that we won, because that's how you win the presidency, and we did it.
That was a bit more from the campaign strategist battle royale at Harvard's Institute of Politics earlier this week. We, here at With All Due Respect, could not think of a better newsmaker to come in and make some headline-scorching news on our final show than the man from Queens who never backs down from a verbal brawl. Of course, we're talking about Hillary Clinton, senior campaign strategist and pollster Joel Benenson. Joel, great to see you. Here's my biggest question, which does not relate to your argument over mandate, but relates to this. You were involved in Barack Obama's campaign in 2008 and 2012. In both instances, that campaign was extraordinarily accurate about what was going to happen on Election Day and the days beforehand. In this election, you guys were really not close to accurate across a wide variety of states. What caused you guys to get it so wrong?
I think it's a tough question. I think it was always a bit of a volatile electorate. I think that we saw things consolidating after the third debate. We always had the third-party candidate, which was a big difference between the previous two elections. And one thing that surprised me throughout the fall, particularly post-convention, I've been in races with third-party candidates, you see them start to drift off, especially as you get into September and late September. It was staying between 8 and 11%. And that's a variable that's very hard to control and very hard to account for as you get closer to Election Day. So we always were looking at groups of defectors, because we always ask the two-way question first and the four-way. And there was a point, and we think, I'm pretty certain from our data, that one of the things that happened was 11 days out when Jim Comey made his announcement and put the email issue back into play against all FBI precedents. We saw Trump's defectors consolidate, and ours, who had been coming to us post-third debate, kind of stopped. It was like a wall went up, and they drifted away after that again. And that was a big chunk. When you look at the numbers, you can see a clear dividing line by age on who voted third party, who stayed in the third party lane, and who didn't. They were our defectors.
And just to follow on that, do you believe that Comey's second announcement on the Sunday before Election Day, that helped Trump? Or
helped Trump?
Yeah.
Yes. I think any time Comey spoke at that point helped Trump.
Even though he was exonerated?
Absolutely. I think it puts the issue back out there again. He was leveraging it, slamming it up against the wall with his tennis racket, playing, squash, if you will, with nobody else on the court because of that. So,
just to be clear, in case you didn't have time to watch me talk about this over the last couple of months, I think what Comey did was one of the most outrageous things in American history, really inappropriate. So, stipulate
starting in July.
Stipulate we agree on that.
I agree with that too, by the way, which gets glossed over a lot.
Yeah. Although you guys praised him at the time, you did.
Yeah,
you did.
We did because you got to realize it's after 15 months, right? Yeah. And then but
it could have been a mistake to embrace him, right?
No, I think that. Look, we're talking about FBI procedures and what a prosecutor should or shouldn't say when they do not have a case to prosecute.
What could you have done differently to perhaps head off the problem, or nothing?
What's happening is momentum stops. Our leads tighten up in states, right? We still believe by Election Day we can win this thing, right? The variable there is what happens with third-party voters and undecideds. And at the end of the day, we're now looking at across 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, 70,000 votes is what makes the difference between Hillary Clinton being president-elect and Donald Trump being president-elect. And in the last 11 days, to have to be dealing with that under any circumstances was probably
suboptimal.
Too big a hill to climb, obviously.
Wisconsin has been pointed to by a number of people, a state that, she never visited throughout the entire general election, and yet you lost it, right? I mean, presumably your sophisticated data operation should have known earlier that this was potentially vulnerable. That seems to me like malpractice, to lose a state that was a battleground state and have never sent your candidate there. No?
Well, look, it's easy to, with 20/20 hindsight, say, well, that should be malpractice to me. You're making judgments based on your data, based on how close you think it is, and based on how much time you have left. Look, we went to states like Pennsylvania at the end. We went to North Carolina at the end.
You went to places like Arizona where that ended up not being close. You talked about Missouri. You talked about all these.
We did not go to Missouri.
But you were spending money in Missouri. You spent money in Georgia. You spent money in states that were blowouts.
The only 2 states we really considered going into were Georgia and Arizona. And when you talk about Georgia, we lost Georgia by 6 points. If you look at that map and say, we lose Georgia by 6 points and we don't win Wisconsin, you'd say, what's going on here? There's a massive disconnect. I'm looking at that going, what happened here?
On questions of members of the Obama coalition, particularly non-white voters, you guys put a lot of faith in President Obama's ability, especially with African-American voters. Since the election, we've had a variety of black people here, speakers, talkers, guests on the show, who've said that they thought Obama's strategy of basically saying to African Americans, I'll take this personally if you don't vote for me, was a mistake, and that it didn't help. And in fact, not only did it not help, it was kind of condescending and may have hurt. Do you accept now that that might be true? Is there any way in which you look back and think maybe the reliance on the Obamas to try to help with those members of the coalition that Obama built was the wrong strategy?
You know, it's a close call. You have both, you know, it's like yesterday we started the conversation off by talking about strengths and weaknesses. And I think when you have things that are advantages, can they become a disadvantage at a certain point, or do you overplay a hand with them? I think that's, like I said, one of the multitudes of things you could look at where the value of these folks was clear. You know, running against somebody who's got Republicans publicly walking away from him, denouncing him, saying basically our message. And we have kind of two highly liked former president, a current president, first lady, et cetera. So, you know, it's hard to sit here today and say, did we overuse them? Did we not use it strategically? I think, you know, in hindsight, looking back at the schedule is something everybody's probably poring over right now and saying, should we have done something differently? But that's not going to change anything that happened on November 8th. So where does it get us?
How is the Clinton political family, not the Clintons themselves, but you and your colleagues, how are you dealing with what had happened?
You mean losing?
Yeah, losing to someone who Donald Trump. Losing to someone who all the people in your campaign talked about it being an apocalyptic.
I think on. Look, I think there is a bigger question here about what President-elect Trump means for the country going forward. I think there's going to be a lot of very high bars and high tests that he's going to have to clear and demonstrate.
I'm asking you on a human level.
No,
you all built up the stakes.
The most gratifying races to win, like on their side, are close races that no one expects you to win. The hardest ones when you lose are the ones when everyone expects you to win and it's close and you lose it close, because you're always going to pick over it and say, like you guys are doing right now, what the hell could we have done differently? Look, we can pour over this for as long as we want, but, you know, we've got to go on and go to the next step. And as I said to a lot of people in campaign headquarters the day after Election Day, you know what? You got to hold your head up and we got to go out because we live to fight another day.
Joel, we want to continue this conversation. Will you come back on Monday? Oh, wait. We're actually not on the air on Monday.
In that case, I will definitely be back on Monday.
Well, you'll be the first guest on this show after it's off the air. You're one of the great guests in the history of the show. Thank you for doing today.
Thank you, guys.
We'll be right back with a Hall of Fame of, with all due respect, guests right after this.
In San Francisco,
Our next guest tonight is 5 guests tonight, all BFFs of this program. On our couch, the co-founder of the 74million.org, a past guest co-host of the program, the Campbell Brown, the former Romney and current Paul Ryan advisor, and the reigning Jeopardy champion.
Thank you. It's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
It's more than nothing.
Yeah.
And it would not be a Senor Jr. block without Harold Ford Jr., the former U.S. Congressman from Tennessee, back when Tennessee elected lots of Democrats to Congress, and an MSNBC political analyst, and from the City of Angels, Republican strategist, the former director of Jeb Bush's super PAC, Right to Rise, Mike Murphy, and a man who always has a right to rise on this program, Democrat Bob Shrum. Thank you all for coming. All right, we're doing a rapid round here on our last program, starting with a question. Campbell, what was the seminal moment of 2016 in Clinton versus Trump?
The seminal moment of Clinton versus Trump. I was going to say the whole campaign was the moment when it became clear to everyone that he was actually going to be the nominee. It was like we were in this fog. Yeah. I think people in the media, I think elites, I think the pontificators never really thought it was going to happen. And I think we felt that way really through the very end of the campaign. I mean, very obviously. And it was, you know, if there was a seminal moment, it was election night when it finally smacked everybody in the face that this is real.
Dan, what was a seminal moment?
I think the
Don't disagree with your wife.
I'm not going to. I'm going to choose one that I know she would agree with.
Yeah.
The Access Hollywood tape was a seminal moment, and it was a seminal moment because I think it lodged the Clinton campaign to a false sense of complacency. They at that moment they thought he's doomed. They sort of delegitimized the idea of him as commander-in-chief, and then they were talking about Georgia and Utah and playing in Arizona, and it was all about expanding the map. And they completely ignored the core, their base. And if you look at, they just lost about 100,000 votes in 3 states.
That's a good answer.
Well, is there any way in which it was seminal in that it revealed the current president-elect to be a sexual predator?
He revealed that earlier. I mean, I think that was...
I'm saying in terms of the impact it had. I think it changed the strategy of one of the campaigns and led to them ignoring something that was...
Good answer. Bob Shrum, what was your seminal moment?
I think there were 2, and they're really related to each other. One, we had a much more civil political conference at USC this week. Mike Murphy was there, and Joel Benenson was there, and there was pretty broad agreement that Comey had a big impact. And I think that really probably did stop the momentum. I think Joel's right about that. But the Clinton campaign bears responsibility for the moment when they decided somehow or other that they were not going to have an economic argument, a comparative economic argument in case that they were going to prosecute in those Rust Belt states against the Republican nominee. You have to change so few votes to change the outcome of the election. The Obama model was there. There was a way to go after his business record, tie it to his economic policies, change 30,000 votes, 35,000 votes, and she's president of the United States.
Harold, seminal moment for you?
I agree with all of these things. Yeah. I would add.
It's a uniter.
Well, but I mean, I think the Comey thing, there's no doubt. I don't think that there's any doubt when he won tonight, to Campbell's point and your point about the tape. I thought the night in which, I can't remember who performed, it might have been Jay-Z and Beyonce, who I'm fans of, but I watched that rally, then I watched Trump say, I don't have J-Lo or Beyonce or Jay-Z, it's just me and my family. And at that moment, it crystallized for me that he was the economic champion. He was a champion voice for middle-class America. And the momentum had stopped. And you could feel in the states and looking at some of the polling data that the movement was not what we wanted on her behalf.
Thank you, Secretary Ford. Mike Murphy, your seminal moment, please.
I'll give you a double one. I think the much heralded, much praised, including by me, Democratic convention in hindsight was about everything.
Mike, hold on 1 second. We got to go to break. It's a hard break, as we say in the TV business. We're going to come back, pick up with Mike Murphy right after this.
All right, we're back with a group of guests so nice that we wanted to have them on twice tonight on this special With All Due Respect finale. Mike Murphy, you were saying seminal moments, go.
The convention, the Hillary Clinton convention, much praised, including by me, but when you look back at it, it shows the head of the Democratic Party and Clinton messaging was not, it was a lot on bathrooms and identity, not a lot on spot welding and lost jobs. And second, when Trump attacked McCain on July 18th, 2015, and nothing happened bad to him, in fact, he went up a little, that was an early canary in the coal mine. It's going to be a very different kind of election.
Right. You were about to fight. You want to fight with Shrum, right?
I don't want to fight with him, but I think it's easy. You know, Comey is an easy punching bag. But if you actually rewind the tape, March of 2015, when we first learned about the server, when the New York Times did the first piece about the server, once that server story came out, that was it. I mean, there was a trustworthiness issue that continued throughout the campaign that was impossible for her to get away from. So I know that Comey is easy to sort of blame at the end, but she had that problem for about a year and a half as a result of her own making.
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I don't disagree with that. That was the original sin. But if you talk about what affected the vote at the end, what was seminal in the sense of having an impact, I think it was first Comey, who brought the email issue alive again. And secondly, it was the fact that, as Mike said and I said earlier, there was no economic and jobs argument, particularly in those Rust Belt states. That's what Obama did to Romney, as you know, in 2012, and that was the model that should have been pursued here.
But she would have gotten out of trouble a lot better had she let the energy out of the lying, stinking, can't believe argument. Instead, they did it was a huge mistake from the beginning, part of their culture, I'm afraid, where they just got into a defensive crouch and dug deeper. They never let the energy out of that thing. That set up, and I agree with Bob, it was the Comey event that froze the race, but ultimately, she kind of owns that problem.
All right. In this New York studio, I want to ask, we just asked about most seminal moment of 2016. This was also, by almost everyone's standards, an appalling campaign. So, Harold Ford Jr., what's the most appalling, disgusting, ridiculous, hard moment of the campaign, 2016?
The moment that offended me the most and I found most appalling was when he questioned the judge out of Indiana and suggested that no politician could take an oath of office and be trusted because every oath given would be predicated on their racial and ethnic makeup, meaning no black could be fair to anyone but blacks, whites to whites, Jews to Jews, Muslims to Muslims. I was so offended as someone that served in office and someone that respects people in office. But there were many. We could write a book on this one, and you guys might just do it.
Most appalling. Dan, you spent a lot of this year appalled.
Yeah,
so,
but I must say, I'm seconding Harold's because I feel like a lot of the other appalling moments were like, they felt like one-offs. They felt like he was popping off, but like you could kind of put it back in the bottle and say, okay, he's just... This one was an expression of an idea.
We didn't talk about this. We didn't talk about
we didn't. The idea that...
And it was only for his own personal interest. There was no principle behind it whatsoever.
Right, but the idea that Harold just articulated was appalling.
It's a powerful moment when you have a junior-senior agreement. Brown.
Well, I think for women, obviously, the tape. Yeah. I mean, the first question Megyn Kelly asked at the very first debate gave us a clue as to where we were headed. But when that tape came out, it was, you know, like a knife in your stomach. And I think for a lot of women, that they'll never get over that. But can I add one other thing?
Yeah.
Every time the media, cable news, took one of his rallies live early on in the campaign, and the culmination of the media coverage, that it became clear that they were going to cover him in the interest of ratings and not in the interest of journalism, was absolutely appalling.
So we got 2 votes for Judge Curiel, 1 for the Access Hollywood tape, and Jeff Zucker. Okay, and I
didn't name names.
We know what you were talking about. That's
Bob
fine.
would have appalled you.
Out to L.A., Shrum, go. Most appalling.
Yeah, look, it started on the very first day when he came down that escalator and he said that Mexican immigrants were rapists. And it went on through the Khan family. The problem with it was appalling, but it was also fascinating and mesmerizing to the Clinton campaign, became their bright, shining object. And they ran a kind of one-dimensional argument that he was unfit to be president. Now, I happen to agree with that, but I live in Los Angeles.
Right.
They needed to make a broader argument.
So Bob basically thinks that the entire campaign was appalling, everything Donald Trump did, dating back even before 2016, all the way back to May of 2015.
No, I just said there were a number of events that occurred during that campaign on his part that were pretty appalling.
Mike, give me a most appalling moment in 2016. Go.
I'll lump them together. It was the debates becoming an applause meter Roman circus shit show. That was the worst moment of the whole campaign in the primary.
You can't say that on TV.
Whoa, yes, you can.
Apparently you can.
There it
was mildly
Mike Murphy, you know what's going to happen now? You know what's going to happen now? This show's going to go off the air because
So therefore be the last episode.
Who thought that we could get through 2.5 years without me uttering a profanity on the air? But Mike Murphy, on the last day.
What is the solution?
Go, Mike, go.
How do you fix this? Audience-less debates?
Absolutely, Dan. I think time to get the circus elements out of it and put them naked on a rock under lights in a tight shot and see what they know. Like the old days.
All right, Murphy trashing the circus, not okay with the people on this set. We love the circus on this show, and we love all of you.
And by the way, we love you too.
Even though these 2 blocks turned into a little bit of a fustercluck. Campbell, Dan, Harold, Bob. Actually, Murphy, you're going to stay on for a second, so because we love you. You were so nice that we love you. We want you on thrice. Your infinite wisdom and insight over the parts of the show the last 2+ years. You're great. We love you. Great. Okay. When we come back, another round of WADR regulars. If you happen to be watching us in Washington, D.C., you can also listen to us on the radio, Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back.
Oh, yeah. Got another round of guests for you. Alex Wagner, a CBS News CBS correspondent, anchor and contributing editor to The Atlantic. Jim Rutenberg, media columnist for The New York Times. Oh. No. Okay. In Washington, Democratic strategist, the co-founder of Purple Strategy, Steve McMahon, our partner throughout the cycle, and back with us in Los Angeles, the Republican strategist, Mike Murphy, still with us. Steve McMahon, start with you. Who is the one person most likely to stand in the way of Donald Trump's agenda, not counting Donald Trump himself, which would be too easy?
I actually think, and this may surprise you, I think it's Paul Ryan and the Republicans in Congress who probably are going to stand up to him relatively soon on infrastructure, and I suspect on a number of other matters that he proposes if he wants to pursue them. And so I don't really think it's going to require the Democrats in the first instance, because I think he's going to have a lot of problems with his own party.
He says, Ryan Wagner, what did he say you?
That's a good answer. I mean, I think the Republican establishment is going to prove to be a thorn in his side on a number of policy issues. I also think an economic populist like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, because that's so much of Trump's message in the coming months, could prove to be difficult for him.
Rutenberg, who's your nominee to stand up to Trump and slow him down or stop him?
This is very similar, but I would say Mitch McConnell.
and sort of the group of donors who have spent so much money ensuring that American policy was pro-trade, pro-Chamber of Commerce sort of republicanism.
Right. Mike Murphy?
You know, I think it might be the lefty Democrats. I agree if Trump does want to start a trade war or something like that, then Mitch and Ryan will be a big obstacle. But somebody is going to audition to be the anti-Trump for 2020 and 2018 politics. And I think Bernie and Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic caucus in the Senate are both going to go for that.
Well, that's a pretty good place to pick up the next question that we had, which is the question about who has the greatest hope of being the focal point of the revival, if there's going to be one, of the Democratic Party. So who do you think, Mike, just starting with you, since you were just talking about those two populists, who do you think the single person is who might emerge?
Well, it's early to guess, but I think the big dynamics are going to be Elizabeth Warren and somebody, and the race will be who's going to be the somebody. And that's unclear now, but there's an opportunity. I mean, Trump is unpopular enough, understatement of the decade, in the Democratic world. I mean, out here in California, they're beating their dream catchers into weapons. They're so mad. That's going to be the jump ball to get that slot, the anti-Trump, and that's worth a lot in Democratic politics.
Steve McMahon, you're a Democrat. What do you think?
Well, I think it could be, obviously Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are going to fight for the control of the progressive wing of the party. I think there are a lot of Democrats who are looking for sort of new leadership. And I think Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and some of the up-and-coming stars in our party who haven't gotten quite as much attention because they've been surrounded by, Barack Obama and the Clintons are now going to be able to break out.
Wagner?
I think new is imperative. I think we should definitely look towards the Senate. I think the incoming female senators, Kamala Harris, Catherine Cortez Masto, Maggie Hassan, very strong. Look to them to be a new leader, sort of generation of Democratic leadership.
Rudy?
Okay, so as number 4 here, I think I would say Harris, but more importantly, maybe someone that we're not thinking about, because that party needs new leadership that's going to have some of the progressive stance of Sanders, of Warren, but maybe a new, younger face.
And none of you said a business person. We saw the head of Starbucks, Mr. Schultz, stepping down. Does anybody think that the Democratic Party's best bet might be to fight back against a Republican, now a Republican business person, with a Democratic business person?
I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to do that because economics is going to be it's going to be message number 1, and I think a more conventional model of Democrat will be attractive to a wing of the party. But I think ultimately Trump's populist message is undeniable, and there's going to be a deep desire, I think, from the grassroots of the Democratic Party to have a real quote-unquote fighter.
And I would say he's also that rare businessman who can play off a populist persona, right? I mean, that's not every business person can do that. Most can't.
Murphy, Mark Cuban?
Yeah.
Mark Cuban?
Maybe. I mean, I think it's interesting to listen to my Democratic friends here because I'm hearing candidates who are very strong in the identity politics wing of the Democratic Party, but that's exactly what got them into trouble this time. Who is the young generational populist? Maybe it's a Cuban. I would normally say it could be a governor, but there really aren't any Democratic governors left. That's the vacuum they've got, and they've got to figure out how to solve it and not go back to the same old stuff.
Steve, do you think Democrats need to just basically adopt the McConnell model of no compromise, no work with Trump, just fight on everything? Or are there places you think Democrats should agree with Donald Trump?
Well, I actually think if he comes forward with an infrastructure bill of the scope that he's suggesting, Democrats should run to embrace it, and he should pass it with Democratic votes. I think the Democratic Party would be well advised to fight for the people, as Mike suggests, who are middle class and who are struggling to make it and who want an economy that works for them. And if Donald Trump is willing to put forward a proposal that helps them do that, they should support him, and they should fight him on every single thing that doesn't.
Let's speed through on a question we asked our last round of guests. First, Rutenberg, seminal moment of 2016.
You get to go first.
Seminal moment. Now I'm first. I'd rather be fourth on this one.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You can't always get what you want, dude.
Can I talk about it in the media frame since I'm the media columnist? So from my lens, a seminal moment, there were so many, and there's some obvious ones, is when Donald Trump gave an election night press conference during the primaries, and it was carried live by all of the networks, and he used it to do an infomercial on his brand of steaks. Yeah. I think that was like a kind of symbolically...
Put that right in the Smithsonian.
Yeah, right there.
Alex?
I think this was not acknowledged as such. First debate, Donald Trump was actually winning the beginning of that first debate because he took Hillary Clinton on the issue of TPP and has said nobody believes that this is how you're going to govern. Nobody believes your message on the economy and on trade. And that was the nugget of his argument that I think won him the presidency.
And Steve McMahon.
So with the wind at his back and headed toward a first or second place finish in New Hampshire, Marco Rubio inexplicitly turned into a robot during that debate 2 days before New Hampshire, which not only cost him his opportunity to take down Donald Trump, but is probably the last moment that anybody had a chance to do it. And he was the last guy who could have, and he froze.
That is, as we say in New Hampshire, a wicked good answer. Pretty big moment. All right, Steve McMahon, Mike Murphy, Jim Rutenberg, Alex Wagner, thank you all.
Thank you.
Hey. Great to have you in here. All right, next up, a very, very special Super Duper, with all due reflect, right after this.
With all due respect. With all due respect.
With all due respect.
With all due respect. With all due respect. With all due respect. Over the life of this show, we've always prided ourselves on covering the nexus of politics and culture. So as part of our finale, we reached out to some of our friends and fans of this show from the entertainment world. Jeff Goldblum, Jeff Daniels, Julianne Moore, Adam Scott, and Savannah Guthrie. And we asked them to help us with a little WADR highlight reel that we put together in the spirit of Auld Lang Syne. Hope you enjoy it.
The year was 2014. The news media was, well, you know what the news media was. And there was a need for something different. So Bloomberg gave us, With All Due Respect. Over 2 years, Mark Halperin and John Heilman would do 526 episodes, cover 2 conventions, report from 12.5 debates, and eat an uncountable number of pork tenderloins. As the 2016 presidential campaign came into full swing, the show grew from a half hour to a full hour. MSNBC picked it up, and their official Vine account drew more than 1,800 followers. By the way, very, very few people know that this theme music for the show was composed by Rizzo. That's why John tweeted it 77 times. Anyway, by the end of the cycle, only Hillary Clinton had refused to be interviewed on WADR, and look what happened to her. But all the other presidential candidates were, as they say, down with the program. Bernie Sanders, Ted Cruz.
Oh, sweet.
Donald Trump.
This is thick ice.
John Kasich, Lindsey Graham.
Whoa, whoa, Yankee boy.
Even Evan McMullin, for heaven's sakes.
Did you ever kill anybody?
Being a guest on With All Due Respect was like being in a movie for the first time. It was exciting, a little confusing. And when it was all over, you asked yourself, am I getting paid for this?
I don't know what the you're talking about. His tiny hands?
The producers always made sure that interviews were conducted at the highest professional standard.
A little on his face, but again, the clothes, spotless.
Very impressive.
Got a napkin.
Oh!
Look at this.
Oh
my goodness.
With piercingly insightful research, they designed segments that brought out the best of everyone who came on the show, gently pushing us out of our comfort zones.
Right. I'm a wino. I just drink wine.
Because this is what the political world wanted.
Okay, let's see.
Like all shows on cable news, With All Due Respect was not without its criticism, and sometimes the critics made good points.
I've never known of a greater oxymoron than you two guys having a show entitled With All Due Respect.
Hey, I came up with that name, Senator, with all due respect. Other people had some alternative ideas for the name.
It's like the Gong Show.
The interviews did not always go as planned, which means viewers never saw clips like this one.
Too much power. I think that if you're going to spend this entire interview trying to make us make comparisons to the real world, you're going to find yourself very frustrated.
In the end, it was a show that always stayed hungry.
And everything goes better with Captain Crunch.
Watching With All Due Respect could make you feel a lot of things. It could make you laugh and cry at the same time.
Team Cruz needs to win it as much as Jon Snow needs a fresh pair of pants. That's also funny.
Are you crying? One thing we'll always remember is how Mark and John made the most of their state-of-the-art set.
We don't just threaten to throw people off balconies around here. Whoops, sorry.
Mark and John always took everything in moderation.
Game, drinking game. I enjoy him. I enjoy this job.
Credit where it's due, they had a pretty cool green screen operation.
For the brouhaha in Brewtown.
I'm the one who castrates pigs.
We promise to keep it down tonight. Also, countless terrific correspondence.
A fellow named Nick Clegg.
He's very young. He's only 17.
And you could tell that a lot of resources went into bringing in the foremost experts in the political arena.
Stand clear of the negative attacks, please.
Now, 24 days after the presidential election, Mark and John are appearing on their final regularly scheduled episode of With All Due Respect. With the campaign over, a new chapter is going to begin in this ever-changing media landscape. And no, they haven't told me if they're writing another book.
We'll let you know about that, Jeff. Thanks again to everyone who helped with that piece, most especially our whacked out, possibly stoned, and definitely brilliant core of producers and editors who, long before that piece, did so much to make WADR unique and special. We will be right back.
And so concludes our 526th and very final episode of With All Due Respect. There are way too many people deserving of our gratitude to thank right here, but we do want to say a special thank you to Bloomberg and also to MSNBC and all the co-hosts and the guests, especially the people right here. Thank you all. And to the great producing team that put this show on the air every night for over 2 years.
And, of course, sending our biggest gratitude to all you viewers out there who tuned in day after day, week after week, putting up with all of our nonsense. We'll be back on Inauguration Week for a curtain call of sorts. But for now, one last time, we say to you, everybody, 1, 2, 3, sayonara!
526. 526. That would have been incredible.
526 episodes.
That's a lot of shows to bank. DVD. Thank you, man. You guys were on a lot.
526.
Very helpful.
Last 2 weeks.
As a trait.
I'm Nina Melendez, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with your first word news. Meetings continue at Trump Tower as the president-elect and the transition team fills out his cabinet. Among those on tap today, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, Encima Global founder David Malpass, former UN Ambassador John Bolton, and North Dakota Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Goldman Sachs President Gary Cohn will return for a second meeting with Trump this weekend. He's been mentioned as a possibility for several jobs, including budget chief. Michigan's election board is deadlocked on Trump's request to prevent a recount. It starts next week unless the courts intervene. Meantime, in Wisconsin, one is already underway, though Trump supporters have filed a federal lawsuit trying to prevent it. And in Pennsylvania, Trump is asking a court to dismiss Green Party candidate Jill Stein's request for a recount. Mr. Trump's transition team has released a list of world leaders who spoke to the president-elect today. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien called Trump to offer his congratulations. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte also called the president-elect to offer support. The presidents of Taiwan and Afghanistan are also said to have spoken with Trump today. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nina Melendez. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, U.S. unemployment hits a 9-year low, but jobs are still under threat from the rise of AI and automation. We'll do a deep dive on what kind and how many. Plus, news breaking of another high-profile hack in Saudi Arabia. Will the incoming Trump administration